Since that is the case, let's get started. Right. So today's topic is about Alacrity and the classes that generate Alacrity on its own. So this listing will be listed as basically three different parts, and the parts are going to be not really evenly spread out, but I'll try to get through all of them as fast as possible. Right. So to start off, there are three classes that can provide Alacrity in this game, excluding EOD beta classes, which we won't talk about. And these three classes are Chrono, and Renegade, and then Mirage. So two of these classes are Mesmer classes, Mesmer specs, but generally speaking, like we will deal with them as separate categories. So from these three classes, each build has their higher ups and downs. Given the best choice to pick will vary from boss to boss depending on what you need other than Alacrity itself. So Alacrity will always be provided. It's the question of what else do they provide means what they're good at. In case if you look at the numbers over here, some of them don't match. This is mostly because the idea is to run two of them in one squad so that you can cover the full 100%. So like 50% plus 50% is 100%, right? So overall, the idea is that sometimes you want to split the Alacrity generation over two people to maximize the value out of the classes. Let's start off with Chrono. It does, generally speaking, it does no damage because of the requirement of you needing to cast your Alacrity skills, and very rarely do you have time to cast any DPS skills that are purely for DPS. It's got great CC capabilities. Generally speaking, Chronos always have great CC capabilities because you can adjust a lot of things. And it's got the focus 4 pull that is also quite relevant in current meta and strategy. The composition for this usually includes one chrono in each subgroup. So you have a 5-5 subgroup, and you're going to put one chrono in each subgroup. The reason for this is because the chronos will be covering Alacrity for their own subgroup only. So it's 100% on 5 people. So with that saying, if with two chronos, you'll have one person cover 100% for 5, and the other chrono cover 100% for the other group. You'll only ever really see this on Twin Largos. Well, nowadays it's even rarer because of the implication of Staff Mirage being a thing now. However, in the past, the Alacrity Chrono was quite prevalent in Twin Largos due to the reason that you had to split up the composition into 5 to fight two bosses, right? If you're not aware. What it provides other than Alacrity is some Aegis share when you're traded for inspiration, and 5-man quickness. The 5-man quickness is the important part because the reasoning for Chrono Alacrity is that you not only provide 5 people 100% alac uptime, you also provide those same 5 people 100% quickness uptime. That is the idea. For Alacron, it's got mediocre DPS. The benchmark is at roughly 29k. Something might go higher. I haven't checked it recently, but it's somewhere around those range. It's got insanely good burst CC. It's arguably one of the best classes for CC on single targets, and operates on its own, so it does not need another person to partner up. The reason for this is because it has 100% coverage on 10 people and can be placed in any position in the composition or in your squad subgroups, and they will be able to provide the 10-man Alacrity. This class is usually played on bosses where big break bars happen, so Samurok, Zlotazor, or frequent break bars also work, so QTP sometimes, and then the Sabir. The other option is to played in power DPS favored bosses. The reason for this is although it is not that good as a power DPS, it's got really good burst in a really short phase, as well as it is the only power class in this entire category that provides Alacrity and has competitive DPS. The only other power class that provides Alacrity is the Chrono. However, the Chrono is not, like, basically the idea of Chrono is not to do DPS when providing Alacrity, or like at least that much, which means the Alacron is the most superior choice for power DPS bosses where burst is required. It can provide subgroup protection due to a trait, which we'll get to later. But generally speaking, the subgroup in which the Alacrity is usually has 100% protection uptime. It can, when adjusted for, provide 10-man stability. So this means Slothazor, QTP, where you know you're going to need stability. Alacrity is a good choice to pick for the stability. This is very common for the other. So the two common ways you provide guaranteed stability for 10 people is either Stand Your Ground for a Guardian or Alacron with the Road from Dwarf, which we'll get to later. Some 5-man might is also provided by this class. However, it is negligible in the sense that it can only cap out people for a certain amount of time before it decays out, and then also it's the druid's job. And sometimes if the druid is slacking, you can help your subgroup specifically with one click of F2. Now, the one more thing that it provides is 5-man Assassin's Presence, which is a buff that gives their subgroup 150 ferocity. Right. I say this as a 5-man buff, it can, however, flood up to 7 people. So if for some reason you have 7 people in one subgroup, including the Alacron, it will still cover everybody. However, this is really rare due to the situation of quickness, limiting the subgroup to 5 people, 5-on-5 subgroups. So it is not that important. All right, so now the next class is Condi RR, or Condition Righteous Rebel Renegade, as some people call it. Generally speaking, it is a DPS class in disguise. The reason for this is that it loses a lot less DPS compared to all the other classes on this list. Mostly that's it loses the least amount of DPS compared to the full DPS variant of its class. It's called OKCC. Generally speaking, the planning to CC is a lot harder than actually doing the CC due to how Revenant as a class works is that all your skills require energy, and if you cast some DPS skills, then you're not going to have enough energy for your CC, in which case you need to plan beforehand, and that sometimes screws people over. Condition RR will need another person to cover the other 50% of the Alacrity uptime. Now, the Alacrity that it provides is 10-man. However, because it does not have boon duration, it can only cover up to 50% of the Alacrity uptime, which means you will need another RR, Condi RR, or another Alacrity Mirage in the group to cover the other 50%. Technically, this Condi RR can be placed in any place in the squad composition in the subgroup. However, most cases is people want to split them up so that the Assassin Presence unique buff is on both subgroups, as well as some DPS efficiency reasons for a specific skill. However, you don't really need to get into that. Just generally speaking, if you can split them up, split them up. No reason not to. So this class is played on Condi favorite bosses or anything that even remotely resembles a long phase. So like anything between 20 to 30 seconds is considered like this class is fine. Other choice is if nobody plays Alacron in a power boss, then you may choose to split the Alacrity up to 2 people, and then you'll be able to cover it. And over that, you can cover 5 might per loop of your rotation, in which you by default blast a fire field of your own, which is 3 might basically permanently, and with 2 renegades in one subgroup. Now, do note this is the blasted might is 5-man, but yeah, so like it does help your druid a bit. Up next is Celestial Alacron or Celestial Condi RR. The idea of this is it is the condition RR Renegade. However, it's taken more boon duration so that it can cover the full 100% uptime. So do take note that condition RR has 0 boon duration, while Celestial Condi RR has quite high. I do not remember the exact number it has, but it is above the threshold in which it can cover it alone. So if you look closely into these things, other than the DPS will suffer, everything else basically resembles the previous Condi RR Renegade. Basically, you use it on the exact same places. Up next, we have Scam, or also called Staff Camping Alacrity Mirage, or just called Alacrity Mirage. It's almost a DPS in disguise, namely is that it does relevant enough DPS that it can out DPS classes if played well. And however, the downside of it is it's got really bad CC, and when I say really bad, it is really, really bad. The idea is that you will need another partner to cover the last 20%. Now, notice this is not 50% of the uptime, but you should treat it as 50% because of how the Alacrity providing the Alacrity is directly related to how well you perform the rotation. So if people screw up their rotation even a bit, that potential Alacrity uptime is going to drop substantially. So in which case, you're just going to take two Staff Mirages, and they're going to put both of them in one group, and then you should have 100%. So just treat this as 50% uptime. This class doesn't really care on which subgroup it is placed at all, generally speaking. It just does its thing. Almost everything that's relevant boon-wise is 10 man, so it does not care where it's placed. It's played on bosses where confusion is a really prevalent stat, and is a direct competition to Condi RR Renegade. So if it's a Condi boss, first of all, if it's a Condi boss, you're going to pick between Condi RR or Scam. And then between the Condi bosses, if it's confusion preferred, or if confusion is good on that boss, then you're going to play Scam. That's more or less like that. Sometimes there's a case where you need more CC and you'd rather play a Condi RR, but that is very, very rarely the case. Now, something more relevant to this class is that it provides 25 stacks of might for 10 people permanently. So what this means is that if your Druid cannot provide the might, the Scam can provide the might for all 10 people. This is specifically relevant for Doom as a boss, because if the Druid is kiting, they might not exactly be on the stack to give the might, in which case a Scam will easily fix this might issue. Furthermore, it's also really useful on bosses like Twin Largos and Soulless Horror, not just because of confusion being strong, but also one of the skills that are really easy to access provides some Aegis that might not sound much, but can go a long way when like it ramps up, and then it blocks a few attacks every 3 seconds or so, and then that is going to ramp up to saving someone's life very fast. Next up is Scam, but with more than 20% boon duration. Generally, the idea is this is the exact same thing as Scam itself. However, it's obligated to take a little bit more of boon duration, most of the time in the form of utility and food. Toxic maintenance oil, I believe. It's written somewhere later on. But basically take a utility to knock yourself above the boon duration, in which you can provide the 100% uptime instead of the 80%. This, again, is heavily affected by your rotation. So if you mess up your rotation, that number is going to drop substantially. So sometimes you will need to take more boon duration than just 20%. All right. Well, this is a bit bad formatting, but comparison conclusion-wise, note is that if you're not running an Alacron, you're going to need to put 1 and 1 together to make a full pie, generally speaking. So you want to run 2 if it's not an Alacron. You want to play an Alacron if the boss needs a lot of CC, or if the boss is power favored. Otherwise, just run condition RRs or Scams, or any combination of between the two, and it should be fine. You should, generally speaking, not be running alone, the Alacrity alone, when playing condition RRs or celestial RR or full Scam, because of the nature is that if you have another Scam, you have no reason not to split it between you. And lastly, with this patch currently, Alacrity providing Chrono is generally shit to play because of how difficult it is to basically keep the uptime on, and also how, generally speaking, useless in any other category other than CC and Alacrity. Right, so going through one by one, Alacrity Chrono. This is the default build for power Alacrity Chrono. There is another variant called the Condi Quickness Chrono that also provides Alacrity. However, that is something that I would not recommend starting off with because of how it's only useful on one specific boss, Twin Largos to be specific. Now, as you might remember, the main objective, or like the main thing on why you want to play a Alacrity Chrono, is that it provides both quickness and alacrity. So I've marked out what skills in this trait line provides alacrity and which ones provide quickness. And my student, you might have known, is that there's only 3 skills that provide, 4 skills that provide alacrity, out of which 2 skills, only this thing and this thing, actually provides alacrity. What this thing does is you cast it so that you can cast this skill again. And what this skill does is extends any boon on you or everybody for 3 seconds. So effectively, you only have 2 sources of alacrity. Rest of them is as like support. Now, you might take note of how this trait line has been switched around. The reason for this is purely because of this last trait, which makes Soy, which is Signet of Inspiration, which is this thing, 10 man. So instead of just providing your own subgroup with a 3-second extension on their boons, you have instead provide all 10 people in your squad a 3-second extension, as well as, yeah, just 3 seconds extension, which might not sound much, but with a not that high of a DPS loss, it can save the other subgroup with like better boons and whatnot. So it is quite helpful. For the traits, from the domination trait line, this is generally a DPS trait line. You don't really care what goes into it. Just look at this thing. All right, this one, this one, this one. If you run a greatsword, you run this one instead. Don't question it. It's just everything's for DPS. There is not much like there to talk about. And for dueling, again, this is a DPS trait line, as you might have noticed on the previously. Pick the specific ones that are marked out as default or on Snowcrows. Like, there is no real reason to switch out any of the traits because all the other ones are utility, or like, as you can see, for example, cloak when leave a clone yourself, blah blah blah. Shatter skill, inflict fire, projectiles, projectile reflection. These are all generally useless. Chaos for power DPS is trolling. We will not go through it because it is bad. Okay. Then for inspiration, blurred inscription is the only one that matters. So signets have improved active effects, and activating one grants you distortion. So this is what when you press the signet, for the signet of inspiration, the improved effect is that it affects 10 people, and as well as it grants you a distortion, which is really helpful when you're tanking. So if you're tanking, it's recommended to run inspiration. Then another side note is inspiration. Also, this skill also activates this one. So grant Aegis to other nearby allies when you give yourself distortion or use shadow skill. So realize distortion when you press the signet, and this distortion will give Aegis. Then for illusions, this trait line, generally speaking, is an open world trait line, because it's really, it does some damage, but the idea of it is that you can provide yourself a lot of boons, and these are boons that are given to yourself. So you should not really be using it in a raid instance. So like in open world, this is really strong, but in raids, because the boons are already provided to you by somebody else, then no, this is just useless. Then for the chrono trait lines, most of these ones are not really prevalent or affect your gameplay by much. Namely, these 3 on top don't really matter that much. You can pick this one for some healing, but it's not that much. Now, from these 3 choices, that's what matters a bit more. Danger time is more damage, and improved alacrity makes your skills go faster, or 50% faster when under the effect of alacrity. So generally speaking, when you're running Alacrity Chrono, you will be playing this one, namely because the build and the boon duration is based around having this trait. If you do not run this trait, you will need to go a lot higher in boon duration, in which case it is also a DPS loss, so it kind of makes this trait obsolete. But you can get away with running this in short phases. Then for this last trait line, Seize the Moment is almost always by default on this build, because you do not have a lot of quickness generation skills when you need to provide alacrity as well. And because of that, and also your role as both a alacrity and a quickness provider, this is basically compulsory. So for the idea of the build, You're expected to provide both quickness and alacrity to 5 people. And you have shield 5, alacrity well for alacrity, as said before, and shield 5 and shatter your F keys for quickness. So Alac well is on a 5-second basis on a 25-second cooldown. With alacrity and as well as improved alacrity trait line, it's 12.5 seconds. So if you assume 100% boon duration, you're going to have 2.5-second gap between each alacrity well cast. And the idea is that this gap is filled by your Signal of Inspiration, your Shield 5, and also your Mimic, so that you cast the alacrity well again. So basically, your big skill or big alacrity is from the alac well, and then everything else is just to fill this 2.5-second gap, which will be bigger depending on like how much boon duration you run. So the idea is to basically fill the gap between the alacrity well casts. For the rotation, it's generate as much clones as possible. This is mostly due to quickness, not the alacrity part. And cast Alakwell off cooldown, use Mimic on Alakwell, cast Signet of Inspiration cooldown. However, do pay attention here is that right at the beginning, you might want to delay Signet of Inspiration so that the Alacrity actually gets provided onto the group before you extend it. So you don't give the boons, you extend the boons that are on them. Throw Shield 5 off cooldown and don't camp the something shield, so usually Sword Shield. The reason for this is because you cannot generate enough clones that you don't to provide the quickness that you're supposed to provide as well. So it's kind of like you need to be on shield so that you can give the alacrity, but you also don't want to be on shield because you don't have enough quickness if you stay on shield. So basically, you need to be weapon swapping at all times. So if you might have realized, the rotation heavily affects how well you provide the alacrity, in which case it's heavily recommended if you decide to play this to learn the rotation hand to hand and also understand it, because if you don't and you like stay behind, people will suffer from lower boons. For CC buttons, Shield 5 is 200 damage when you throw it out and then it slowly comes back to you, and both hits will do 100 breakbar damage. F3 Shatter will do 100 for each clone that are present on your like skill bar, and that is if you don't have any clones, you yourself are included as well, so you will do 100 breakbar damage even if you don't have any clones, depending on your weapon, because you will always have a shield offhand, but on the other weapon set, your offhand weapon might change depending on the situation, and depending on what you're running, these are the numbers for each of those skills. Do note, however, Focus 4 is very rarely used on breakbar. Instead, it is very often used for ad control, so you will very rarely be using this for breakbar damage. For other things that you want to take note of is that you almost always are defaulted to control ads. So like the Focus 4, really broken. You want, if there's any ads that you're supposed to be pulling, you're probably supposed to be pulling them. And as a re-emphasis, this class is really bottom of the barrel. If you have no other choices, you run this. If you have other choices, run something else. Well, up next is Alacron, the so-called default of the compositions. For Alacron, this is the default traits or like trait combo. Now, I've marked out this skill and this skill. These two skills are relevant to your gameplay. Everything else is just copy it and forget about it. So what this skill does is whenever you swap under 10 energy, you will have you will start with 75 energy instead of 50 when you legend swap. This is really important for your rotation and to upkeep your rotation and have enough energy to cast what you really want. Then for this one is Righteous Rebel. This is what makes the class tick. This is what makes your F4, which pulses Alacrity, become 10-man from instead of the normal 5-man, and pulses 2 extra times. The boon duration that the Snowcross builds provide you and want you to run is based around this trait. Never take this off if you're running Alacron. This is basically required. Then something else to take note of is this trait here basically gives you 33% crit chance whenever your endurance bar is full. So which means if you dodge, you're going to lose that modifier. It's not that important in the sense that if you die, you're going to lose more DPS, but if possible, usually you don't want to dodge. Now, for the traits on Revenant, this Corruption is a Condi DPS trait line. You won't be playing this in Alacrin because Alacrin won't play Condi. Then Retribution, which was potentially before a DPS trait line, but now it's just obsolete. Salvation is a heal trait line. Self-explanatory, it provides a lot of healing. And yeah, okay. And Invocation is a DPS trait line that has Charged Mist, right? So this is basically a DPS trait line, but also has this trait here specifically, which makes rotation tick. Devastation is purely a power DPS trait line, self-explanatory, and there's not much to it. And as for the Renegade trait line, as you might have noticed, Righteous Rebel is the only one that really matters. However, there is also All for One, which is where the protection comes from. So when using legendary Renegade abilities, grant protection to allies nearby summon warband members. So this is the 5-man protection uptime that I was talking about. So for the class, the idea, press F4. That's it. That's the idea of the class. And as for the rotation, press F4. Alright, it's really self-explanatory. The class is entirely based around this one button because that's the only button that provides the alacrity. So to put it into more detail, for basics, you want to be pressing F4 off cooldown. It's 20 energy, and because of it costing energy, when you legend swap, you reset your energy back to 50, or depending on if you have the charge miss trait or not, 75. And you want to reset it up to 75 so that you can cast other skills that are also DPS relevant and not just flood energy and only press F4. Put your energy under 10 in the amount of time that your legend swap comes off cooldown, and then you swap legends, you go back, and then you do the same thing just with different skills. For the CC, you have Dark Razor, which is 6 times 100. So Dark Razor is a kind of a unique skill where it pulses a 0.25 second days, and it's gonna pulse it 6 times. And because of how the game works, anything under 1 second stun or daze is rounded up to 100 break bar damage on bosses. So what this means is that it's going to pulse 6 times 100 break bar damage over 6 seconds. It's a bit slow, but it's quite a lot of break bar damage. On the contrary, Staff 5 is kind of like a push forward animation. But generally speaking, if you have a Staff 5, or like if you have a break bar, you're going to Staff 5 into it every time without fail, because it does insane amount of CC. It usually on bosses, it does, depending on how big it is, it does like a 1/3 of the break bar to half of the break bar alone just from Staff 5. It is really strong. And lastly, you have Shiro, which is the green legend. Elite skill, which is 300 break bar damage. However, because it costs 50 energy, which is basically your entire legend swap, it's not worth casting for what it does. Like, it's a PvP skill, it's a strong PvP skill, but it's really bad on raids. Some other things you might want to take note of is that if you have a break bar meter and you're not on the top of it, you're doing something wrong, because you should be on it, so on the top of the break bar meter as an Alacrin. And some other things is that you can help with might at the beginning. However, generally speaking, the druid should be able to cover the 25 stacks of might without any huge problems. Then for condition RR Renegade, these is the default trait line. There is no real swapping around because this all 3 trait lines are required for this build to tick. For the important traits, again, Righteous Rebel, this is what makes the entire class tick, and also the dodge traits, kind of like repeating. But as you might notice, Charge Miss is no longer here, so even if you're slow with your rotation, you pay more attention to the legend swap rather than to your energy. For the trait line, this is the condition trait line. These skills are, generally speaking, all DPS skills. Doesn't change your gameplay even if you don't know what they do. So the idea is to press F4 while doing your Condition Renegade rotation. If you play Condition Renegade by itself, then it should be really easy to adapt into a Condition Righteous Rebel Renegade, because you, generally speaking, you will only need to do some minor adjustments. For new players that want to get the basics, the idea is to press F4, as said before multiple times, and then Legend Swap off cooldown, because that is what you get your DPS from. So dump your DPS skills dump your energy with DPS skills, and then press F4 at the same time, and then whenever you have Legend Swap off cooldown, you swap so that you reset your energy and you keep going. Now, for a more detailed replacement is if you learn the right Condi or Renegade rotation, there's 3 points where you can press F4, or you need to make an adjustment to press F4. So in Renegade stance, this goes into a little more detail. In Renegade stance, you're going to cast Ice Razor twice, once at the beginning, once at the end, right? So if you need to press F4 at any point between these parts, you will ditch this Ice Razor and press the F4 instead at any point during this, because of the energy requirement. If you need to press F4 at any point between this, you will ditch this last Ice Razor here, and if you need a F4 pressed anywhere over here, you will do a weird where you deactivate Malik's Elite a little earlier, so do you have the energy to press F4. Generally speaking, this is the hardest to execute. These two will simply be a one-to-one replacement with one skill for another. Now, for the CC buttons, Dark Razor does again 600 in total, and one pulse is 100. Shortbow 5 does 200 break bar damage and costs 15 energy. It's a decent skill. I would recommend casting it. Axe 5 is 150 break bar damage. However, do note Axe 5 is not just a CC skill, it is also part of the DPS rotation, which means sometimes you will want to delay it a bit so that you can cast it into the boss break bar instead of just for damage. The Malik's Jump, I don't remember what it's called, but that does 150 break bar damage. Generally speaking, you won't be using this for break bar damage because it's not worth the energy cost that it does break bar for. So it is better for you to cycle through your skills faster so that you can get back to Dark Razor rather than use Malik Jump for CC. Some other things, as mentioned before, you have basically your subgroup has 3 permanent mites at all times because of you blasting firefields. And generally speaking, learning to CC and deviating from the rotation itself is much harder than learning the rotation itself. Because of how Revenant works is that if you need to cast any CC skills, you're going to have to replace some other DPS skill with the CC skill because you won't have enough energy otherwise. Then for Condi Celestial, Condi RR Renegade, it's a really short guide because generally speaking, it's the exact same class as Condi Renegade. Condi RR Renegade, it just runs different gear and meets the boon duration requirement to provide 100% alacrity with a Renegade. That's basically all it does. It's the same thing as Condi RR Renegade. Now for Scam or the Staff Mirage, these are the traits, and these are also the default traits. There is no other choice for it because all 3 trait lines are required for this build to tick. So for the important skills that change your gameplay, there's 2. Okay, so the first one is this trait here. Is what it does. It spawns clones whenever you already have one clone available to you, and then you cast a deception skill. So this is one of your only clone generation possibilities if you don't want to run an entire loop to go around and spawn clones as a pre-pep. It is possible to play without this, in which case you would take rid of Sands instead, so this one is a DPS trait. However, that is much harder to execute, so for a new beginner player, I would not recommend. This trait is when you shatter your F4, all your clones will drop a mirror on the place that they shattered from, and if you walk into that mirror, you will gain Mirage Cloak, and if you gain Mirage Cloak, you will get an ambush attack that on your skill 1, which we will come to later, and it's really important, so take note of this. So Dueling is a self-explanatory DPS trait line. Take the things, don't think about it ever again. Chaos is slightly different, is that it's a DPS trait line, but there's one skill here. It's cast Lesser Chaos of Storm when you get healing skill. This is a bit relevant, is that Lesser Chaos of Storm will grant Aegis, so it is helpful for bosses like Twin Largos or Soulless Horror where you need Aegis. Or you don't need Aegis, but it's really helpful to have random Aegis procs. Then for the Mirage trait line, as mentioned before, Self-Deception. Using a Deception skill will create a clone if you have any other clones active. And Desert Distortion. Illusions shattered by Distortion become Mirage. Ambush skills become available for a short time whenever you grant Distortion to yourself. And for the rotation, the basic is you always want to have 3 clones up, and you want to utilize Crystal Sands and False Oasis, both of which will drop a mirror, or as mentioned before, the Mirage Mirror on the ground. And by picking them up, you gain Mirage Cloak. So these 3 ways, you give yourself Mirage Cloak. And whenever you give Mirage Cloak, if everybody can see the game, I believe. If you ever give yourself Mirage Cloak, so what it does is if I dodge here, as you can notice, I have Mirage Cloak, I get another skill on my skill 1. And by casting this skill 1 is what gives you Alacrity. This is very important. Dodging does not give you Alacrity. Casting skill after you get the dodge is what provides you the Alacrity. So Crystal Sand is this thing, so it casts the thing, it goes in, you walk into it, you get Mirage Cloak, and you can cast the ambush skill. Same thing with the False Oasis, so you cast it, it drops it on the ground after a few seconds. Yeah, there you go, and then you walk into it, you get to cast. So the idea is that you want to basically be casting this skill all the time. That's what gives the Alacrity, and that's what you provide Alacrity with. And lastly, the last point is weapon swap. Is the reason behind it is not based on the class, but based on a sigil that you would be running by default. I don't have it right now because I didn't really gear this. But what it does is whenever you weapon swap to that weapon, it's going to refund half of your energy bar. So half means like 1 dodge basically, because you use half of it to get 1 dodge, right? And this is also why you run 2 staffs instead of just 1, so that you want to be weapon swapping off cooldown, so that you don't lose out on the value and the possibility of the missed dodge that you could have done if you weapon swapped. For the more detailed part is you want to do a short combo where if you press F2 is your condition DPS skill. However, as you might notice, to point 1 always have 3 clones up. Because of this, you want to, whenever you F2, you will break all those clones, and because of that, you want to have a combo ready to spawn those clones back as soon as possible. So this is what will do the clones as soon as possible back to you. So F2 to break all your clones, 2 SAF2 to spawn 1 clone, then Jaunt and Crystal Sand. Jaunt and Crystal Sands are both deception skills, so if you might have noticed, the idea is to have the 1 trait proc. So is to have this trait here, self-deception trait proc, and by doing this, you will by doing this combo, you will spawn 2 clones with self-deception via casting Jaunt and the Mirage Crystal Sands. F2, assume I have 3 clones, but F2, and then Jaunt, you see, spawns another one, and then this will spawn another one. And then if you walk into it, you can, pick it up. And that's generally the gist of it. For the idea, as mentioned before, it is to dodge or pick up a mirror to give yourself Mirage Cloak, and then press 1 to cast the actual ambush attack that gives the Alacrity. For CC buttons, you have Staff 5, which is this one, that does 100 break bar damage, really lackluster on the 20-second cooldown. And you have F3, which can hit up to 400 break bar damage for each clone that you shatter. This is generally bad because you might not have clone generation available to you to cap out yourself at 3 clones after you do it. So as you're coming back to this point, always have 3 clones up. This is the most important part. Another skill I did not put in here, but might also become relevant, is Signet of Domination. This is a skill that you generally speaking don't want to press because it gives you 180 condition, and as you can see, it's here. But if I press it, it goes away until the cooldown comes back. So if I press, well, reset it, please. So if I get by the time I get the cooldown back, then I get the buff back, right? So that's how it works. So generally speaking, you don't want to be pressing this, but this is a last ditch effort if you're gonna wipe if you don't break the bar. And if that is required, do press it. It is a choice. It does 300 break bar damage. It's not that bad. It's just insane DPS loss. Right. And for other things, you provide also 25 stacks of might for all 10 people. And because of this, it's kind of relevant, as said before, on boss fights where like Doom, where the Druid is not necessarily on the stack, and this can be a replacement as a stack might provider. Your range on your boons solely comes out of your staff 1 ambush attack, which is 360, which is rather small compared to other skills. So if I show it to you, actually. Yeah. So if you look at the circle, if you look at the thin circle here, around on the edge right here, yeah, that is the ambush like buff range, and it's kind of small, so do keep note of where you're standing. Lastly, for a beginner, I would heavily recommend running Toxic Maintenance Oil or Egg Benedict, or both, in most of the time both, to give you the extra boon duration to start out and close the skill gap, because this class, the boons you provide is directly related to how well you do the rotation. So if you mess up on your rotation, people are going to suffer due to low boon uptime, in which case they're going to complain to you. So running both of these is going to help you with closing that gap which you require the experience with. Then for solo scam, it's same thing. Literally same thing as scam. It's just you take the boon duration that you can cover 100% alacrity on your own. I believe that is it for the presentation itself.